What's up, YouTube? This is Too Raw for TV. Alright, so before I get into this video, I want to give a big shout out to the brother Clayton Phillips for once again showing love to Too Raw for TV, aka Too Raw for Sports. And he gave me a question. It was, hey, Too Raw, have you ever wondered why we never saw an LA versus New York rivalry in the NBA? The two cities are rivals in other aspects, but it never seemed to cross over into basketball. Well, I think part of the reason behind that is because, and if you mean long term, it's because the Knicks have not really been a dynasty type team. Not for long stretches. Like, there was a bit of a rivalry in the early 70s when, the Lakers had Jerry West, Elgin Baylor, Wilt Chamberlain, those years. And then, of course, the Knicks had that fabled starting five of Willis Reed, Dave DeBusschere, Bill Bradley, Walt Frazier, and Earl of Pearl Monroe with Phil Jackson. And then later on they had Jerry Lucas on the team. Now, during those years, there was a rivalry. Because you got to remember, they went to the finals. They faced each other 3 out of 4 years. So there was a rivalry then. But the Lakers fell apart after Wilt Chamberlain retired and Jerry West and those guys got old. And then, the Knicks aged out during the mid to late 70s. And while the Lakers would rise again to prominence in the 80s, the Knicks were perennially either a lottery team or a mediocre team getting knocked out in the first, second round for the most part. So the Knicks never really rose back to prominence during the 80s. And then in the 90s, when the Knicks became good, they were good enough to be a contending team, but they were too busy having a rival in the Eastern Conference because they couldn't dominate the East. They were having a rivalry with the Bulls or the Pacers. Meanwhile, the Lakers, for much of the 90s, after Magic Johnson retired, were a mediocre team. Showtime, the Lake Show, excuse me. Then, of course, during the late 90s, the Lakers got their act together and became a contending team, but it wasn't until the early 2000s that they became a dynasty team. Now, the Knicks actually went to the finals in 94 and 99, but they played the Rockets and lost in 94, and then the Spurs in 99 and lost. So they was playing two Texas teams, not the Lakers. And since then, the Lakers, since 2000, the Lakers have won 6 championships. But the Knicks, since the early 2000s, have more or less been hit and, more missed than hit. So that's part of it. They were, not since the early 70s have they both been two top-tier teams contending for a title. So there was no way they could really develop a rivalry in the NBA. Then another thing you got to look at, in my opinion, is the fact that a lot of teams didn't move to the West anyway until the 50s and 1960s. When you look at most sports franchises, when I say franchise, I'm not talking about like individual teams. I mean like the NBA, Major League Baseball, the NFL. Most of these teams, most of these sports entities, leagues, I should say. That's what I should be saying. These leagues, they started out in the East. All the teams were in the East. And then it wasn't until the late 50s when people started really moving out to the West, and the West Coast changed from being like you know a land of rural and trees and you know farmland or whatever. It changed. It changed by the 1950s into a booming area with a booming economy, a booming area population, and suburbs and businesses. And then that's when these areas started becoming a lot more intriguing to owners. And of course, the most infamous move in the late 50s was when the Brooklyn Giants moved to San Francisco. Some old Brooklyn fans still are sad over that, honestly. But I mention all this because a lot of times, look, you got a team that's already in the Eastern Conference or in the East, whatever, and then you just starting to develop a fan base in the West, where you still have some people resenting that you went to the West. Then that kind of explains why there wasn't a lot of a rivalry. You had to wait for a generation to be born, fans of this franchise, to hope that there's a rivalry. But then when there was a rivalry, the people who were younger, who grew up fans of this franchise now in the West, don't remember the rivalry. So that's part of it too. So that's pretty much my answer, man. I think neither team has really been great at the same time since the 1970s. But you're right. You would think East Coast versus West Coast. You'd think there would be a rivalry, but not in the NBA. It really hasn't developed. Maybe, hopefully, one day that is the case. Because, like I said, it was once a rivalry in the late 60s and early 1970s with the New York Knicks and the Los Angeles Lakers, but not since then. Of course, the biggest rivalry has been the Lakers and Celtics. And also, I think culturally things have changed. A lot of these players, they look at this as a business, and these guys are so friendly today. They don't look at it the same way that we did growing up. There used to be a lot of rivalry in the NBA. There used to be, of course, Lakers Celtics. We all know about that, but it used to be Celtics Sixers. They hated each other. The Sonics and the Rockets didn't like each other. They had a bit of a rivalry. Trying to think of different teams. The Bulls and the Bulls and the Knicks, obviously. But there was also a rivalry in the 90s into the 2000s. Knicks and Pacers, and then Knicks and Heat. That got really ugly in the late 90s. Look, if you like defensive basketball, physical basketball, there was nothing better than Knicks Heat basketball in the late 90s. I'm telling you, if you sit... I know a lot of people are like, man, it's boring. They're not scoring. But if you watch those games and you see the physical intensity of those games, then you understand why a lot of us love that type of basketball. Whatever, man. Every now and then I like a high-scoring game, but give me the NBA of the late 90s. But yeah, we don't have the rivalries. That's another thing that's missing from today's game. We don't really have these sports rivalries. We don't have them within the NBA anymore. Lakers Kings. That was another rivalry. And sort of one-sided. And if you're a King fan, you could argue that things didn't go the way it should have in 2002. But it is what it is, But anyway, that's my answer to this question, at least. Tell me what you guys think.